Georgia and Oregon battling for Jared Curtis. This has been a slobber knocker on the trail, a back and forth, because Jared really loves both programs. He could see himself succeeding at each school, has love for each of them for various reasons. I think he's really hit it off with Will Stein, Oregon's offensive coordinator, Dan Lanning, and that coaching staff. He feels comfortable around that young group, sees the success they're having on the field, sees the way quarterbacks like Bo Nix and then Dylan Gabriel lit it up, and then just the success that the team is having. And then the way Bo Nix came into the NFL and had a terrific rookie year. He's been out there 3 times and has really enjoyed his time around Oregon. When he decommitted from Georgia in the fall, Oregon was the leader. Now, there's been times since where Georgia has moved back in the front, then Oregon again, and now I think it's Georgia right now that may have the slight edge. But these programs have over a month to continue recruiting him, continue to have conversations with him, having conversations with his representation, having conversations with his family. And it's recruiting's a game of inches. And for Curtis, it's coming down to the inches because it is so close here. But getting back to Georgia was an awesome experience. Proximity to home, really fits in from a culture standpoint with that program and that staff. Loves Mike Bobo and his history at the position, the way Georgia's historically recruited the offensive line, the way that they've started to stockpile that receiver room again. They had an excellent recruiting class at the receiver position last year. I think that's attractive to him. Again, just proximity to family. There's some factors for Georgia here that are going their way. And then I think this is truly the recruiting cycle where we see Kirby Smart in Georgia kind of let it rip a little bit more on the NIL front. I think when you talk to some people, I think that to a certain degree, I think he thought that people were full of shit at how much they were actually getting. And that Georgia was winning with the way that they were recruiting and developing players internally. But to have some misses on the recruiting trail and know that those misses were purely because of NIL, I think we're seeing Georgia arming up in that arena more than ever in 2026 as well.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see because you look at like historically good, or I mean at least recently good programs who have had to change the way that they've done it, and they've been reluctant to change with the times. And, I've never thought that maybe Georgia took a step back last year because they were reluctant in a lighter version of the way that Clemson was, in the sense of not wanting to back up the Brinks truck for a high schooler.
But it wouldn't show its head until the next 2 seasons anyway, because it's all what they already have on the roster was what they already had. And if Carson Beck doesn't get hurt, I think all 3 of us probably think they're playing for the national title again this past year. So you're in the title game. Hell, they were in the final, they were in the playoff anyway and won the SEC. So it was another really good season for Georgia. But would they have taken a step back from those expectations if they weren't stepping up on the NIL front? Absolutely. But that's also stepping up in the portal. There's a lot of different ways to construct your roster, and Georgia's always going to be a place when a big time guy goes in the portal that they're going to have a puncher's chance to land them because of the way that they develop NFL talent, the way they get guys ready to play on Sundays. And now if they are indeed what I think they are, which is being more competitive in the NIL space, they have as much to sell as any program on the trail for a portal target, and then certainly a high school recruit.
Well, and that's what I wonder is they have been so successful developing players for the NFL. Do you think they maybe thought there's a discount for that?
And
because there is.
Yeah, and I think that's still true. I think people will go to Georgia for a little less than going somewhere else, betting on themselves to get a really good first payday in the NFL and then be prepared to earn a second one. When you see how many players from Georgia are doing so well in the NFL, not just getting drafted high, but they're prepared and ready to play at that level and be among the best in their profession. So I think that Georgia could get one of these elite players that we're talking about for a little less than what other programs are offering, but they got to be competitive, because over a 3 or 4 year span, that could be a difference of $5-6 million, right? If you're not competitive with your offer. So if you're less than, would they do it for less, 1.5 less over that span? Now you're talking about maybe a competitive discount. But if you're $5 million less over a 3-year span, that's a shitload of money.
Yeah.
We'll be right back with more from Steve Wiltfong. But if you want to bring home the W this weekend, the best way to do it, the ultimate tailgate package, the burger box from Whataburger. Perfect for every occasion, but especially when you're sitting around watching some high-level hoops. The burger box comes with 10 single or double burgers with or without cheese, your pick of sauces, and all the fixins. Spicy ketchup. You can go grilled jalapenos. You can keep it basic, or you can go wild. Either way, it's going to be a slam dunk. Also, next weekend, order online April 4th through the 7th and earn double reward points from the Whataburger app. And don't forget, get that burger box, but you could also get the What a Wings party pack, 72 boneless tender bites, a family fry box, and your choice of sauce. That is how you bring home the W. Do it with Whataburger and order online April 4th through the 7th. Double reward points. Bring home the W with Whataburger.
Steve, I was wondering this, and I know that this is probably maybe you only need 2 years of precedent because everything that happened 3 years ago and beyond is probably not as relevant with the NIL emergence. But when it comes to Curtis, I know people are really excited about him. Just in your mind, how many times has a player decommitted from a place and had that place still in his final two at the end and then picked the other team again? I always feel like they end up going back to where they started, don't you? Like, I don't know how often that happens where they go to a different direction after decommitting and still keeping the team they decommitted from in the fold.
Right. My recall on those things just struggles. I got so many names.
Yeah.
Bobbing in my heads and new recruitments and new things I'm tracking. I felt like oftentimes if you decommit from a school, it's hard to get them back in today's landscape. But for Jared Curtis, this in particular, Georgia was a program. He decommitted because he wanted to go out and explore more schools and continue having dialogue with coaches and not have to call Mike Bobo every time out of respect and say, hey, I'm going to be somewhere else this weekend. He didn't want them to ever find out about it on social media, not from him. Right. So it just kind of became a thing where it's like, I'm calling this dude every other week to say, hey, I'm going to go check out a game here, or I'm doing this. It's like, and they would be like, great, man, do your thing. But remember, you're always a dog. Right. So it was like the same conversation over and over. And so Jared always had love for Georgia. He just wanted to go through his process because he did commit early. And I don't think, you and us, we've been around recruiting for so many years that like we take for granted that it's their first time going through it. Right. So yeah, it's easy to get caught up in, all right, I'm talking to Kirby Smart, I'm talking to Ryan Day, and I've taken all these visits. I've been recruited since the end of my freshman year, and I'm ready to make a commitment here. I don't think they don't know that means that just puts the bullseye on the school you're committed to, and these schools aren't going to stop recruiting you. And it's hard to not pick up the phone. Well, hey, Mike Norvell wants to talk to you today, or Shane Beamer or Kirby Smart. Like, what are we not going to take? Right. It's a lot to say, no, I'm literally not talking to anyone anymore. And so with that, Jared wanted to go through his process again and respectfully told Georgia that they were still involved, but he was going to reopen, and he did that. And then he visited Georgia shortly after that. And then he visited Georgia earlier this month alongside Oregon, and he's slated to be back at Georgia for G-Day this spring. And, Georgia, I've seen coaches blow the whole thing up when a kid or their family says something they don't like, because they forget it's the kid's first time going through the process too. And they've recruited hundreds and hundreds of kids. And yes, these coaches get burned every cycle, but they're well compensated to recruit. But I've seen coaches get pretty pissed at a kid and their family. And look, we're all humans here. I mean, this morning I got a little snippy over something that probably I didn't need to get snippy over, right? But
I need to know what that is after you're done answering the question.
This is what it is, right? So these coaches will, they'll blow a whole recruitment that they've led or been near the top for 5 months because a kid says, look, I'm decommitting right now. And it's like, Georgia just, hey, you want to reopen your process, you're still our top guy, and yeah. and Coach Bobo and Montgomery Van Gorder at the time, before he moved on to the NFL, stayed on him, and their family loves being around Coach Smart. Coach Smart isn't the same kind of recruiter in Dan Lanning, that he's not going to call you as much as Dan Lanning's going to call you. But when you're around him, he's fantastic. It's obvious that he's a player's coach. I think that shows up when they're losing games as much as any time, the way he's hugging up his players on the sideline when they're coming off and not he's real poised. When George is not playing real well, he's pretty poised. I think, families and their kids get on campus and they love being around Kirby just as much as any coach in the country. So Georgia's doing a good job. They got to dot some I's and cross some T's in that recruitment and get it to the finish line. And Oregon's going to battle all the way, and I would imagine that they'll keep communication going even after he commits again. But, they'll have to pivot to some other quarterbacks themselves.